What's happening, guys? We're back. It's been a while. All right, so I owe you guys an apology. It has been a long time since the last episode. I got super sick. Me and both my boys were basically laying on the couch for like a week and a half with some sickness. I don't know what it was. It wasn't COVID. We got tested for that. So it was just some sickness. I don't know. But I'm feeling quite a bit better now. Still not 100%, but definitely good enough to come out here and get some work done on the car. So at the end of the last episode, we had finished the shock mounts for the lower control arms on the front, and we determined that they were wrong again. So since then, I have actually done a little bit of work. I got them rebuilt. So the problem that I found was when we built them, we didn't spend a lot of time kind of fine tuning those mounts before we welded them on. Honestly, I just got excited and welded them on the way that they were. So I didn't put the time in to really make sure that the mount point was as low and outboard as we could go. So when we welded the old ones on, the mount, this bolt was actually over here and up a little bit. It was kind of in this area. So I rebuilt the plates, and then I actually took a whole bunch of time kind of fine tuning this lower seam until we got this bolt as low and outboard as we can go. And now the shocks actually fit. So I got the chassis dropped right down. It's sitting on a couple of 3.5-inch blocks. That's gonna be our extreme low position on the chassis. Basically, if we go any lower than that, you can see our oil sump's gonna start coming into contact with the ground, and then we're gonna have a real bad day. So chassis is at full bump height, I guess, and the shocks fit. We're basically sitting on the bump stops on the shock, so that's about perfect. So our suspension on the front is at least close to done. I did put the springs on there, and unfortunately the springs that came in that kit are also too long. So when I have the springs on, even if I run these adjuster collars all the way to the top of our shock, the spring doesn't allow the car to go down to its ride height. It sits too high. Not a big deal. We're just gonna have to buy shorter springs. The kit came with 12-inch springs. QA1 sells 10-inch springs and 8-inch springs. So we'll get a different spring for the front. Kind of a blessing in disguise because I think I'm gonna have to go to a higher spring rate as well. The springs that I got are 300s, and it just feels a little bit squishy yet. So we might go up to like a 325 or a 350. So front suspension is done for now. We're gonna move on to the rear suspension. So I've already done a little bit of work on the back end. I pulled the rear axle out because obviously the shock mounts that were on there were gonna be wrong, because that's the way that it goes. These are the lower shock mounts that we had on the rear axle. Obviously same problem. This section is way too big, so the shock wouldn't actually fit in here. So we'd have to come in and trim all this out and make it quite a bit smaller. But even if we did that, these also wouldn't allow the rear end to go down to its full bump height, like where it's sitting right now. It would sit too high. Same story as the front. So we have to rebuild the lower shock mounts on the axle. Now we could redo this. We could build some more plates like this and weld them onto the rear axle, but I think I got a better idea. I came out and built these. So this is just a chunk of 1x2 rectangular tubing, and then I drilled 2 1/2-inch holes and put some sleeves in there. So my thought with this is we'll weld this onto the axle, and then we can build a plate that bolts onto here and extends out and has our shock mount on that plate, so that those plates, essentially our shock mounts, will be bolt in, bolt out. That way, if we screw it up again, we don't have to keep pulling the axle in and out and welding on it and whatnot. We can just undo some bolts and put a new shock mount in. This is actually a fairly common method on a lot of hot rods. You'll see like a standard shock mount package or a universal shock mount package will just have some blocks like this that weld onto the rear axle, and then it'll have like these plates with like a million bolt holes so you can adjust it to where you need it to be. So not a new concept, but I think it should work for what we're doing. So I got the rear axle out. The plan for today is we'll get these guys measured up and jigged up where they need to be on the rear axle, make sure they're symmetrical, make sure they're level, so that when we build our shock mounts, they can all be the same. And then we'll weld them onto the rear axle. We have to be a little bit careful because the rear axle is still full of oil. I don't particularly want to drain it. So we'll have to just kind of be a little bit careful with our heat. Shouldn't be an issue, but I also don't really want to fire on my hands. So we'll be careful. We'll go slow. So we'll get these guys welded on, and then we can put the rear axle back in the car, put some tires on the rear axle so that it sits at the right height, and then measure it all up for our shock mounts. So that's the plan. Let's get these guys jigged up and weld them on. is a huge pain in the butt getting that axle in and out. This axle is really hard to get in and out because of two mistakes I've made during the build phase here. One is using this axle in general, the Ford 8.8. It's too big for the car, quite frankly. I never have to worry about snapping an axle shaft, but I probably wouldn't have to even if I went with like a Ford 7.5 or even like one of the Toyota units. So at some point in time, we might downgrade our rear axle just to get a little bit less unsprung weight, make it a little easier to work on and whatnot. But we'll keep trucking away with this, and then if we need to change axles in the future, once the car is completely done and on the road, we can do that pretty easily. Just get a new axle and weld the brackets on. The other issue that we have is the design on the chassis. So this side has a chassis member that runs vertically where the panhard mount goes. So the hole between that chassis member and the rear bulkhead is quite small. It works fine when the axle wasn't dressed with anything, but now that we have the brakes and everything on there, the brake disc just physically doesn't fit through that hole. So what I've had to do is remove the brake disc and caliper and actually cut the backing plate down. We cut the lip off of the backing plate. You don't need a backing plate for a car like this, so it's not a big deal, but it does make it a pain in the butt to get in and out. But we got it in, struggled through that, got the suspension all hooked up. Next step, I'll reassemble this corner, the brakes on this corner, and then we'll jack the axle up and put wheels and tires on both sides, and that'll show us where our suspension's gonna sit at full bump, and then we can start kind of templating out for those lower shock mounts. So let's get after it. Whoa. All right, so there is our shock mount. So this will be where it bolts onto that bracket on the rear axle tube. And then this is where our shock will bolt on. We'll build 2 of these and then box them together, very similar to what our old mounts were. And then that should be plenty strong enough. So one of the things you can see on here, sorry, I'll figure out how this is the old shock mount. You can see how much further we've had to kick the bolt hole away from the axle tube. When we built these initially, I kind of had in my head that the springs would be like 2.5, 2 3/4, because I'm used to working with legend car equipment, which is quite a bit smaller. The QA1 springs are just so much girthier that we have to kick the shock out a lot further. But that should work. It looks good. I threaded it on there. Turns out you can thread into cardboard, and it held really good, and it looks like it should work. So the next step is going to be to cut all these out and weld them together. That's just rinse and repeat of what you guys have seen before, so I'm not going to show you guys that. I'm going to do that on my off time. One thing I should tell you, we ended up raising the back of the car up. So I guess you guys can't see it. Right in here, there's the block, the 3/4 inch or 3.5 inch block. And when I had it down on that, the rear tires actually came up higher than this rear deck height. So they actually came all the way up. We're gonna have to run rear fenders on here, so if we left it at that 3.5 inch ride height at full bump, the tires would actually be up and over the deck lid, and then our fenders would be even up and over that. So we'd have this goofy bump of some sort. It wouldn't work very cleanly. So I raised it up 3/4 of an inch, and then that puts the tires about 1/2 inch below our deck height here. So we'll be able to run a rear fender that's level with that rear deck height. And then if, I fully bottom the car out and we squish those bump stops, the tire might rub on the rear fender a little bit, but on the rare occasion of when I'm gonna fully bottom this car out, I don't know, we'll deal with it. Shouldn't be that big of a deal. But anyhow, that's it for this week, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, hit the like and subscribe button. Go check us out on Instagram, Left Foot First Media. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know what you think of the project so far. Let me know where I'm making all of my mistakes. It really helps out kind of having the community and you guys watching for my mistakes. Yeah, that's it. I'm out of here.